The moment I knew something was deeply wrong came when my badge refused to open the parking gate. It was early on a sticky Tuesday morning in Chicago. The air thick with that late summer humidity that makes every breath feel like a small defeat. I sat in my car, the engine idling, tapping the scanner again and again. Red light. Red again. The security guard, a young guy barely out of college with nervous eyes, leaned out of his booth and shrugged apologetically. Might be a glitch.
Ma'am.
Happens sometimes. I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and drove around to the visitor entrance like I was some outsider instead of the woman who had spent 24 years shaping the risk architecture of Vanguard Global Solutions. 24 years of being the one they called at midnight when a merger clause threatened to unravel millions in valuation. 24 years of carrying the institutional memory in my head and in meticulously maintained digital archives that most executives treated like dusty relics. It started subtly, the way these things always do in corporate America. A canceled calendar invite here. A meeting suddenly including HR there. Hallway conversations that fell silent when I approached. Sophia Langford, the new Chief Operations Officer brought in 6 months earlier to streamline and modernize, loved phrases like institutional pruning and accelerated capability refresh. She said them with a polished smile during all-hands meetings, her Apple Watch gleaming under the conference room lights as she quoted Harvard Business Review case studies like they were gospel. I had watched her predecessors come and go. I had written the very protocols they used to exit people quietly. Termination guidelines, severance language, even the scripts HR read from during difficult conversations, I had authored or heavily revised most of them during my time leading compliance and enterprise risk. I never complained. I didn't chase trends or post inspirational quotes on LinkedIn. I showed up early, stayed late, kept 3 versions of every critical document, and carried a red pen that made junior analysts sweat. But Sophia never asked me a single substantive question in our brief interactions. She spoke over me in meetings, praising fresh perspectives while quietly removing experienced voices. First it was Robert in procurement, then Lisa from audit, both escorted out with their boxes and security escorts like they had committed some crime instead of dedicating decades to the company. The pattern was clear. The old guard was being cleared out under the banner of innovation. 6 weeks into the latest round of renewal, my department of 14 had shrunk to 6. I knew my turn was coming. I felt it in the way my access notifications slowed, the way my input on pending regulatory filings was suddenly routed through junior staff. Yet I didn't panic. Panic had never been my style. I prepared. I had prepared for this exact scenario years ago, during a major merger when senior compliance roles were being asked to shoulder enormous liabilities without corresponding protections. That preparation lived quietly in Schedule D of the legacy continuity provisions, an addendum buried deep in the compliance archives, written in dry, precise legalese that most people skimmed past. It had been updated annually, always under the radar, always with proper approvals tucked into larger packets that busy executives signed without reading every paragraph. It defined what happened when a long-serving employee in key risk or advisory roles was asked to resign voluntarily at the company's request. Full retroactive severance calculated from peak earning years. Immediate vesting of all equity. Extended health care. And broad indemnity across every division I had ever audited or advised. The trigger was simple. The act of the company initiating the resignation request itself activated the clause. No negotiation required. I had built it as a safeguard for others, never imagining I might one day need it myself. But corporate loyalty, I had learned, is rarely reciprocal. The HR meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon with no agenda. Just a quick check-in. I dressed in neutral gray, carried only a notepad and a pen I reserved for important moments. The conference room felt smaller than usual. Jenna from HR sat with her practiced, empathetic smile. Brad from legal beside her with his rigid posture. And an empty chair waiting for me. Jenna slid a manila folder across the polished table, like she was offering a menu. Alexandra, we've appreciated your long service, she began. Her voice syrupy and slow, as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. Today we're offering you a choice. You can resign voluntarily, or we proceed with termination effective immediately. I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag, pulled out a sheet of company letterhead I had prepared earlier, and said calmly, I'll write my own. The room went still. Brad shifted in his seat. Jenna blinked rapidly. I clicked my pen and wrote one clean sentence, then added the critical phrase at the end, effective upon full release, as defined under Schedule D. 12 words. That was all it took. I slid the paper across to them. Jenna picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read. Brad leaned forward, his professional mask cracking just slightly. You don't want to review the standard terms? He asked. Not necessary, I replied evenly. I drafted the original framework for these policies in 2012. Page 9 still uses my original wording on severance triggers. I kept the Oxford comma, thoughtful choice. Silence settled like heavy fog. They had expected tears, anger, bargaining. They had not expected precision. They thought they were offering a polite exit. They had no idea they had just pulled the pin on their own grenade. I stood slowly, tucking my copy into my folder. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, voice steady. The door clicked shut behind me with quiet finality. As I walked to the elevator, the weight in my chest wasn't fear. It was the calm of someone who had spent decades building the frame and now watched others step through the door they had opened themselves. The official email went out by late afternoon, after 24 years of dedicated service. Alexandra Bennett has chosen to step away to pursue new opportunities. I read it from my back porch in the suburbs, a glass of Cabernet in hand, my golden retriever curled at my feet. The wording made it sound voluntary, almost whimsical, like I had simply grown tired of success. My system access was already revoked. Badge dead. Retirement portal frozen. Even my Slack profile had a little celebration emoji next to my name, as if I were heading off to some joyful retirement party instead of being systematically erased. They moved fast, but not thoroughly. By the next morning, payroll systems flagged an anomaly. Severance hadn't processed automatically the way it usually did. My benefits remained pending, and the equity ledger showed no movement. The script that handled these transitions, a script I had helped design and debug during the 2018 system overhaul, contained a safeguard. It cross-checked against active legacy provisions. Schedule D had just been activated. I pictured the scene in legal, some junior associate, coffee-stained tie and energy drink in hand, scrolling through the digital archive. They locate Schedule D, read the trigger language once, then twice, then a third time as realization dawns. The clause was 4 paragraphs of airtight language. Any employee in covered legacy advisory roles whose resignation was initiated at company request received full retroactive severance based on their 3 highest-paid years. Indexed for inflation. Immediate full vesting of all stock options. COBRA override for extended healthcare. And sweeping indemnity protections across every division previously advised. In my case, that covered risk management, regulatory compliance, vendor oversight, and mergers and acquisitions, 4 areas where my fingerprints remained embedded in foundational policies, audit trails, and contract templates that couldn't be easily unwound. The numbers started adding up quickly. Retroactive severance alone approached 7 figures once peak years, and inflation adjustments were applied. Vested equity pushed it higher. The total liability landed right around $4.8 million. Not the kind of line item that disappears quietly in a Fortune 500 company's quarterly report. Sophia Langford had framed my departure as part of her operational renewal vision. She had dismantled several compliance controls I had spent 8 years hardening against regulatory scrutiny. What she failed to grasp was that those controls still carried my original language, timestamps, and approval chains. Removing me didn't erase the architecture. It simply left the company exposed if ever audited. Now, the very mechanism meant to protect the company was being used against it. HR tried the standard playbook first. They sent polite follow-up emails asking for my preferred mailing address for final documents. I didn't respond. Brad from legal attempted a direct text. Alex, let's discuss the terms amicably. I left it unread. Instead, I updated my LinkedIn with a neutral post. Grateful for the chapter. Looking forward to what's next. Colleagues liked it cautiously. A few messaged privately asking if I was all right. One stood out, Marcus from finance, who had once survived a brutal audit thanks to my intervention years earlier. His message was simple. Tell me you didn't activate Schedule D. I typed back. I wrote it. That was the moment the full weight hit them. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a dispute. It was enforcement of a contract they had collectively approved over the years without fully understanding its implications. By day 3, the scrambling intensified. Finance began emergency reconciliation meetings. Legal requested clarification memos on legacy protections. The CFO, who had signed off on my departure with a curt understood. Proceed, now faced a projected $4.8 million hit that threatened to ripple through bonus pools and investor communications. They hadn't terminated me for cause. That would have been their clean escape. Instead, they had chosen the polite route, offer a voluntary exit to avoid any appearance of age discrimination or retaliation claims. In doing so, they had walked directly into the clause I had authored precisely to deter such maneuvers. I spent those days at a quiet cafe near headquarters, sipping espresso and watching the city move around me. No gloating, no public bitterness, just the steady knowledge that preparation beats panic every time. My attorney, Elena Ramirez, whom I had worked with for 15 years on everything from merger negotiations to regulatory responses, began assembling the documentation package. We didn't rush. We didn't threaten. We simply prepared to demonstrate, with chronological precision, that the clause was valid, current, and triggered exactly as written. The voicemail came on day 6. A senior partner from an outside firm, voice measured but strained. MS. Bennett. This is Thomas Hale with Whitaker and Associates. We're reviewing the language in your resignation regarding Schedule D and would value a brief conversation for clarification. No demands. No posturing. Just the careful tone of someone realizing they had inherited a minefield. I forwarded it to Elena without comment. She responded the next day with a single PDF attachment. No cover letter. No greeting. Just the file titled Bennett Entitlements Reference Package containing notarized copies of Schedule D annual revisions, my equity ledger showing matured options, compliance memos I had co-authored and that had been approved by previous CFOs, email trails confirming internal reviews, and a final page with one line. Please confirm whether your client prefers settlement or litigation. That document landed like a quiet explosion in their boardroom. The emergency board session was called for the following Monday. Closed doors. No minutes recorded. Just the key executives, external counsel, and the projected PDF that laid out the full scope of Schedule D. I wasn't in the room, but details filtered back through trusted channels, people who remembered favors I had done over the years, pulling them through audits or helping them navigate difficult regulatory filings. The CFO reportedly aged visibly as he read line by line. Sophia Langford sat rigid, her usual confidence replaced by tight-lipped silence. The lead counsel didn't soften the blow. The clause was enforceable. The language was unambiguous. The trigger had been pulled the moment they requested the resignation. Exposure was at minimum $4.8 million, potentially higher depending on final calculations of cost of living adjustments and equity valuation at vesting. Worse, the indemnity provisions meant the company remained on the hook for any future claims tied to decisions made in the 4 divisions I had advised, decisions that touched billions in contracts and regulatory filings. They considered fighting it, of course. Float a compromise offer. Argue that Schedule D was outdated or never intended for this scenario. Elena shut that down swiftly. Every revision had been properly logged, approved, and maintained. The clause had even been reinforced during a minor severance architecture update the previous year, an update the current CFO had personally signed off on without noticing the buried paragraph expanding coverage for legacy resignation events. The board faced an uncomfortable truth. Attempting to contest the clause risked drawing regulatory attention to the very compliance frameworks I had built. It risked public disclosure of internal documents showing how they had systematically removed long-serving risk experts under the guise of renewal. It risked lawsuits from other former employees who might discover similar protections. Settlement was the only rational path. 3 weeks later, the public announcement appeared buried in a Thursday afternoon press release about executive realignment and strategic capability enhancement. My name appeared fourth on a list of 5 departures. No details. No acknowledgement of contributions. Just sanitized corporate language about transitions. Behind the scenes, the actual documents told a different story. The final severance agreement, the payout memo, the executed equity vesting confirmation, and the formal acknowledgement letter all bore the precise language I had once drafted as contingency templates during earlier labor negotiations. The company acknowledged my instrumental role in cross-divisional risk integration and described my departure as a transition of mutual respect. They paid every dollar, retroactive severance, full equity vesting, 18 months of extended benefits, and the indemnity provisions. The total wired quietly, without fanfare. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post victory statements. I changed my LinkedIn header to a quiet quote from my early career. Don't fight the storm. Write the manual. Then I stepped back. I slept in for the first time in decades. I learned to bake sourdough bread, the kind that requires patience and precise timing. I taught my niece how to read a 1040 form properly. I read contracts the way others read novels, slowly, deliberately, finding beauty in airtight clauses and logical structure. One afternoon, I saw Sophia from across a downtown crosswalk near the river. She was on her phone, voice raised, gesturing sharply, likely managing another round of renewal somewhere in the organization.
She didn't notice me.
I didn't wave. I simply kept walking, feeling neither triumph nor bitterness. Only the steady weight of having chosen preparation over reaction. This was never about revenge. It was procedural. They chose the door. I ensured it closed exactly as the contract specified. In the end, the company survived the payout. Budgets were adjusted. Bonuses trimmed. Investor questions deflected with vague language about one-time charges. Life continued. But somewhere in the archives, Schedule D remains, quietly waiting for the next time someone assumes legacy knowledge is disposable. The larger question lingers in quiet moments, in a corporate world that prizes fresh perspectives and rapid change. What happens to the institutional wisdom that once kept the machine running safely? When loyalty flows only one direction, is the truly wise response to build safeguards in advance? Or does that preparation itself reveal a deeper cynicism about human institutions? I built the clause to protect people like me. In the end, it protected me from them. And yet, watching the city lights from my window at night, I wonder if there could have been a version of this story where preparation wasn't necessary, where experience was valued rather than pruned. Perhaps that's the real legacy. Not the money, not the clause, but the quiet reminder that knowledge, once written into the system, outlives titles, reorganizations, and even the people who try to forget it. The weeks following the payout brought an unexpected stillness. My days, once filled with urgent regulatory filings, merger due diligence calls at odd hours, and the constant hum of compliance monitoring, now stretched open like an unwritten page. I walked more. I sat in parks watching people rush to meetings I no longer attended. The $4.8 million arrived in stages: severance first, then equity liquidation proceeds, then the final indemnity confirmation. Each transfer was accompanied by formal notices using the exact language I had once templated: professional, neutral, devoid of any admission of wrongdoing, yet implicitly acknowledging the contractual obligation. Friends from my old life reached out cautiously. Some wanted details, drawn by the rumor mill that inevitably circulates when large sums move quietly. Others simply checked in, sensing the emotional undercurrent beneath my composed updates. I shared little. The story wasn't for gossip. It was a private accounting between me and the institution that had defined so much of my adult life. Elena and I closed the file with a final exchange of confirmations. No litigation. No public statements. The matter was resolved as both sides had technically agreed through the mechanism I had authored years earlier. In one of our last calls, Elena remarked, "You didn't just write the rules, Alex. You made sure they couldn't be ignored when it mattered most." She was right, but the victory carried a subtle ache. 24 years of loyalty, of foregoing vacations to meet deadlines, of mentoring young analysts who later advanced past me, of sacrificing personal life for the company's stability, all distilled into a financial transaction. The money provided security.
Yes.
It allowed me to support my sister's medical needs without worry, to fund my niece's education, to finally travel to places I had only read about. Yet it also underscored how transactional corporate relationships ultimately become. I began volunteering with a local nonprofit that helps mid-career professionals navigate career transitions and financial literacy, teaching others to read the fine print, to anticipate scenarios, to document their contributions felt like passing on the manual I had lived by. In those sessions, I saw echoes of my younger self, eager, idealistic, believing hard work and loyalty would be reciprocated. I gently introduced the idea that preparation includes protecting oneself, not out of paranoia, but out of realism. One evening, reviewing old files I had kept at home, I came across a photo from 15 years earlier, me at a company gala, standing beside the then CEO after successfully navigating a major acquisition that saved hundreds of jobs. The pride in my expression was genuine. The company had thanked me publicly then. Policies I wrote that night still governed parts of their operations. Yet when renewal came, those contributions were treated as obstacles rather than assets. The moral tension remains unresolved in my mind. Was my foresight ethical? Did embedding such a powerful clause represent prudent planning or a self-fulfilling prophecy of distrust? In building protections against being discarded, had I contributed to the very culture of disposability I resented? Or was it simply the responsible act of someone who understood how fragile institutional memory can be in the face of quarterly pressures and new leadership visions? The company moved on. Sophia Langford continued her renewal initiatives, though with perhaps slightly more caution around legacy documentation. Vanguard Global Solutions reported solid earnings, the one-time charge absorbed without lasting damage. Employees still clock in, execute strategies, and dream of advancement. But for those who remain, especially those with deep tenure, there may now be a subtle awareness that the rulebook contains hidden chapters, chapters written by people who once believed their knowledge was indispensable. As for me, I wake each morning without the weight of constant vigilance. The red pen rests in a drawer. My dog and I take longer walks. I read more fiction, finding comfort in stories where characters discover hidden strengths at the moment of crisis. The clause did its job, but the real lesson was internal. True power lies not in the explosion, but in the quiet architecture that makes the explosion possible when needed. The city hums outside my window tonight. Somewhere, another executive is drafting a new policy, assuming the past is irrelevant. Somewhere, another long-serving employee feels the first subtle signs of marginalization. And somewhere in the archives, Schedule D waits, patient, precise, and ready. The question for all of us in this system is simple yet profound. When the institution you helped build turns on you, will you have written the exit door yourself? Or will you be left pounding on one that was never designed to open? Months have passed since the final wire transfer cleared. The money sits in diversified accounts, managed conservatively because old habits of risk mitigation die hard. I travel occasionally now, short trips to the Pacific Northwest, where the forests feel ancient and unchanging compared to the rapid churn of corporate life. In those quiet spaces, away from screens and policies, I reflect on the arc of my career not with regret, but with a measured acceptance. The central conflict was never truly about the money, or even the clause itself. It was about the human cost of disposability in modern American business. Companies speak of family, loyalty, and shared purpose in glossy annual reports. Yet when market conditions or leadership philosophies shift, long-serving contributors become line items to be optimized. My story is one of many, though most end differently, without the safeguard, without the preparation, leaving people financially vulnerable and emotionally adrift after decades of dedication. I chose to write the clause because I had witnessed too many colleagues exit with inadequate support after giving their best years. I updated it annually not out of cynicism, but out of realism. Institutions evolve, memories fade, and power dynamics change. By embedding protections within the very system they controlled, I ensured that knowledge and experience carried weight even when voices were silenced. The $4.8 million wasn't a windfall, it was deferred compensation for years of unseen labor, midnight revisions, audit defenses, and risk frameworks that prevented far costlier disasters. Yet the haunting question persists: does such foresight erode trust? Or is it the only rational response in a system that rewards short-term thinking? When I see younger professionals entering the workforce full of idealism, I wonder how to convey this truth without discouraging them. Preparation isn't paranoia, it's stewardship of one's own life within larger structures that rarely reciprocate fully. In quiet conversations with former colleagues who reach out, I share fragments of the lesson, document everything, understand the policies you operate under, and never assume your contributions are indelible. The system forgets faster than people realize. My niece, now studying business, asks about my time at Vanguard. I tell her the story in measured tones, emphasizing the importance of reading between the lines of every contract, every reorganization memo. She listens intently, recognizing that success in corporate America requires both skill and strategic self-preservation. The city lights still flicker at night, each one representing someone grinding through deadlines, building careers, hoping their loyalty will be remembered. For some, it will. For others, it won't. My path taught me that when the latter happens, having written the rules yourself can transform a moment of rejection into one of quiet empowerment. Not victory in the triumphant sense, but equilibrium restored through precision and patience. As I close this chapter, the lingering resonance is one of cautious hope. Corporate America will continue its cycles of renewal and pruning. New leaders will arrive with fresh visions. Legacy employees will face similar crossroads. perhaps somewhere. Another compliance expert is quietly updating an obscure schedule, embedding safeguards for the day when their own badge fails at the gate. And perhaps, in that preparation, there lies a deeper ethical stance, protecting the human element within the machine, ensuring that experience isn't discarded lightly, and reminding institutions that the past they seek to shed still holds the keys to their future stability. The story ends not with explosion, but with a slow exhale after the tension releases. The clause did its work. The company paid what was owed. I stepped forward into a life defined by choice rather than obligation. Yet the moral echo remains, in a world that moves fast and forgets faster. Those who write the manual may ultimately determine how the story concludes, for themselves and for the organizations that once relied upon them.